Hello and welcome to English Heritage's exclusive Members Week. This is Trial by Dinner with me, Dr. Annie Gray. Thank you so much for supporting English Heritage at this time. I do hope that you enjoyed this talk and that you get a chance to watch several others as well during the week. So, Trial by Dinner, the art of dining in Victorian England. Victorian England was pivotal for the development of dinner as we know it today. So I'm here to talk about Victorian dining, partly because it's so important and partly because many of you will be fans of the Victorian Way videos on YouTube. And so it's really nice to be standing here in the kitchen at Audley End House and Gardens to be able to talk about a period which really is the one for which this house is perfect. I'm going to start by defining dinner. When do we dine? Who dines? Well, if you think about dinner today, we don't all have dinner every single day. Who we have dinner with and when we have dinner, it depends very much on who we are in terms of our class and our regionality. For example, I tend to have breakfast, lunch, and then usually just a supper in the evening, or sometimes a dinner. I definitely have a dinner if I'm inviting people over. I might have even a dinner party, and my dinner will usually be at around 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the evening. But if you go up the road and you speak to one of my slightly older friends who grew up very much in rural Norfolk, she will have breakfast, lunch, and then tea at about 5 o'clock. And only have dinner really on a Sunday, which will then be at what I would call lunchtime. And it's been like this ever since the 18th century. Dinner is the main meal of the day. It's the one where you have the most food, the one with the most etiquette, the most important one. It is also the meal to which you are most likely to invite people, the most formal meal of the day. All of this comes out of confusion at the end of the 18th century. What was happening was that dinner was changing. Dinner had been at about 2 o'clock in about 1700, and by 1800 dinner was usually at around 5 or 6 o'clock. Dinner got even later the posher you were. Lunch was sort of invented somewhere in the late 18th century and came in to just to fill that gap between breakfast and dinner. And then there was tea, which was had at some point in the afternoon if you were posh enough to have it, and then later on became the name of the meal that wasn't dinner but also wasn't quite supper if you weren't posh enough to be having dinner in the evening. If you're not confused, well, you probably should be, because it gets even worse when you go through the 19th century. But suffice to say that in a house like this, there would be 2 dinners. There would be dinner for the family, which in 1881 would be the Braybrook family, the Neville family, Lord and Lady Braybrook. They would have their dinner in the evening around 8 o'clock. And then there would be dinner for the servants, and they would have their dinner at around what I would call lunchtime. It was laid down usually in household regulations. If you were working class, your dinner, your main meal of the day, was somewhere around midday. If you were upper class, it was in the evening. So there are lots and lots of different types of dinner. If you're in the workhouse, if you're in a boarding house, if you're very, very poor, if you're middle class, if you're upper class, dinner. It can be any time, anywhere. I am going to concentrate today on one type of dinner, and that is the dinner of the upper classes, the wealthy, upper middle class and hugely wealthy aristocrats, the kind of people that owned Audley End House and Gardens or Rest Park or any of the other large country houses owned and run today by English Heritage. I'm going to start by reading you a quote which explains the title of today's talk. This is a quote from Emerson, who was an American author writing about Britain. This is an amalgamation of his visits to England in 1833 and 1843. In an aristocratical country like England, not the trial by jury, but the dinner is the capital institution. It is the mode of doing honour to a stranger to invite him to eat, and has been for many hundred years. It is reserved to the end of the day, the family hour being generally 6 in London, and if any company is expected, 1 or 2 hours later. Everyone dresses for dinner in his own house or in another man's. The guests are expected to arrive within half an hour of the time fixed by the card of invitation, and nothing but death or mutilation is permitted to detain them. The company sit 1 or 2 hours before the ladies leave the table. The gentlemen remain over their wine an hour longer and rejoin the ladies in the drawing room and take coffee. The dress dinner generates a great deal of table talk, which reaches great perfection. The stories are so good that one is sure they must have been often told before to have got such happy turns. Well, obviously that's just like all the dinner parties that I hold today. I mean, why wouldn't they be? But this is Audley End. This is a plan of 1904, and I just want to show you exactly what I mean by dinner happening everywhere. So here's the plan of the house. We at the moment are here in the kitchen, in the service wing. Dining happened over there on the first floor rather than the ground floor. That is the upstairs formal dining room. That's the one we're focusing on for this talk. But dining also happened on the ground floor there. That's actually not a picture of Audley End, that's the household dining room at Osborne House, but it would have looked very similar to that. That's the private dining room for when the family didn't have any visitors. And dining also happened here and here. Again, these are pictures of other properties in the servants' hall and the housekeeper's room, because the servants ate dinner in two different places, just as the family did. Dinner is an amazing thing. It's a fabulous thing to study, and it really is a way of getting under the skin of a society. It is society in a microcosm. But there are an awful lot of misconceptions about Victorian dining. These are just a few of the comments that I have heard over the years or that have been written as feedback under various videos that I've been involved with, including the Mrs. Crocombe videos. You say to people, what are your associations with Victorian dining? And they'll say, Mrs. Beeton, overcooked vegetables, bland and unappetising. Women couldn't eat because of all the corsets. And a lot of things like, I wouldn't eat that, and it's stodgy and it's gross. And well, all of that's kind of irrelevant, because I wouldn't eat an awful lot of modern food. And so just as modern food is sometimes awful and sometimes brilliant, so too is Victorian food. Most of the things I've written on here are simply misconceptions. Brown Windsor soup didn't even exist until the 20th century. It's a music hall joke. A mishmash of weird ingredients. Oh, a mishmash of weird ingredients for one person is another person's really delicious vegetable curry. All the things that are on here are the kind of aspects that I want, by the end of this talk, you to really be able to go, not true, I know more than that. So that's my challenge. Let's start at the dawn of the Victorian age. 1837, the young Queen comes to the throne, the hope of the nation, finally an innocent, sweet young girl, somebody who is, well, not a horrible old man like all of her uncles and ancestors before her. The Georgians were a pretty awful lot. And when Victoria came to the throne in 1837, she was seen very much as the birth of a great new era, a brilliant era still to come. This was the coronation feast held in her honour in Cambridge, so just up the road from Audley End House where I am at the moment. This was a huge feast held for 15,000 of the most deserving poor people in the area, with another 17,000 spectators who came to watch. This scene was repeated across Britain, and it didn't change. There were a lot of continuities in the Victorian age, as well as the changes that I'm going to go on to talk about. But something like this, a huge feast for the poor, this scene was repeated right the way through Victoria's reign, for the birth of her first child, for the birth of her first son, for the marriage of various children, and then when she died, for the coronation of her son Bertie. This, as you can see, is an enormous undertaking. There are people in the middle watching the poor eat, and there are people around the outside watching the poor eat, because it's a spectator sport. And then you can see all of the tables laid out so that all the poor eating can well be observed. They ate beef and plum pudding, the really emblematic dishes of Great Britain, and they drank beer. The dawn of the Victorian age was very much the end of the Georgian age, and you cannot see it as anything other than a continuity. In terms of dining structure, well, we ate in a style known as à la française. This was a style which was based on the idea of lots and lots of dishes on the table at once. It had evolved in the course of the 18th century, and it was a beautiful way to eat. Over here, you've got a picture which shows Queen Victoria's coronation feast, another one, at Mansion House in London. This one actually had the Queen present. You can see her at the top under the canopy of state. In the middle middle, you have a picture of a more muted, middle-class dinner at Mary Ellen Best's dining room in York. But you can see the way the style works, and you can see it especially on the table plan. This is a style based on essentially 3 courses: the first course, the second course, and dessert. Dessert is implicit in nearly every table plan I will show you, so do not forget that after all the food that we cover throughout this, there is always dessert. In an à la Française table setup, if you were having your full 3 courses, your first course would be soup and fish and what were known as made dishes, or dishes with a certain level of skill in. They were also known as entrees. It's one of the reasons that in America today, an entree is a main course, whereas in France today, an entree is a first course, because the entrees are big dishes, but they're in the first course. And a lot of the names of this period end up affecting us and being part of the modern day language. The idea is that all of the dishes for each course are put on the table at once. So for your first course, you have your soup, your fish, and your made dishes all on the table. You eat your soup, then you eat your fish, and then you choose from your made dishes. All of that is taken away, and in comes the second course, which will be roast meats and vegetables and sweet equivalents of those made dishes in the first course. So where in your first course you might have, say, chicken cutlets with a gravy as your made dish, in your second course you might find yourself with a blancmange or a fruit tart, or perhaps some little cakes. All of that goes away, and then comes dessert. And dessert is ice creams and water ices, sorbets, fruit and nuts. And that idea of what is in each course stays the same throughout the Victorian period. If you have a 1-course dinner, which is the kind of thing that the Braybrook family would have been having in the private dining room here at Audley End, it's probably just going to be fairly simple. A pudding, some vegetables, a meat dish, 4 or 5 dishes, maybe 6 or 7, maybe 8 or 9 on the table at once. You help yourselves in this style. You have waiters, they're on hand, footmen, as it would be in a house like this, to serve the wine. But the main thing that you're doing is you're serving yourself and you're serving others. And that's what you can really see going on in this picture of Queen Victoria's banquet. It's a lovely picture because there are people scooping the jellies out and really wellying in. And you don't usually get to see people eating in Victorian portraits like this. This is what it would have looked like in practice in terms of what was literally on the table. This is Attingham Park, which is a National Trust site, and it's been laid out as if dinner is happening in the 1830s. You can see that in the middle of the table, you've got dessert on the table, fruit, nuts, not yet ice creams because they'll melt if you're there for 2 hours. And there are lots and lots of dishes on the table as well, all the way around. The idea is you sit down, there is no written menu, but you look at what is on the table in front of you and around, and if you want something from over there, you will ask a footman to bring it round and you'll help yourself. If you want something from down there, you'll say, "Sir, could you just pass me perhaps that exquisite-looking dish of potted woodcock?" And down will come the potted woodcock. It's a really communal style. You get to pick and choose your own dinner, though, so at the same time as being communal, it is also really individual. You also had to know your way around the table. If you didn't know what a dish was, well, you could ask, but if you were new to the table, did you want to ask? There were real pitfalls for the diner. There's a story told, for example, of a young cleric in York who sat down to find in front of him a dish of ruffs and reeves, small wading birds. It's illegal to eat them now. Anyway, he looked at his dish of ruffs and reeves and thought, "Great, this is all for me." Off he goes. Well, of course, he ate them all. That dish was intended for the whole table. You can imagine he would probably not have got preferment after that one. The idea was you had a small amount of as much as you wanted and then you stopped. To gargantuanly fall on the table and scarf your face, that was not good form. The point was to show restraint because you were a civilised person. The dishes on the table were helped as well by the fact that the plates were shaped for this style. So you often find, if you go around country houses, that you will see sets, especially dessert services, with lots and lots of different styles of plates in them. Shaped plates, lozenge shapes or corner plates, those kind of things. Those are all about the dish placement on the table. So, for example, in this Coalport dessert service that you can see up here, that plate at the top very clearly has a handle. That's because it would be for the flying dishes, the hors d'oeuvre, or outside the main oeuvre. You would slide them in and slide them out. Something like a vol au vent, which means of course, flies in the wind. Perfect, because it goes in, you take it, and off it is whisked. You might have a square plate like that, which would be perfect for something like blackcock or snipe, which would be served on a bed of toast and are all the same size, so something square would be great to keep it regular. And that oval plate at the bottom, well, that might be absolutely perfect for perhaps a larger animal, something like a hare, which would shape itself to the oval very, very well. You also have, at this point, sugarcraft confectionery on the table a lot. This is the era just after Carême has been the kind of god of cuisine right across Europe. Antonin Carême was a chef, perhaps the world's first celebrity chef, who specialised in sugarwork above all else. He was the grandfather, really, of French cuisine, and his stuff was widely admired worldwide. If you were wealthy enough, you would ask a confectioner, it'd be very unlikely to keep your own in-house, to make for you beautiful sugarcraft sculpture, and you'd have them on the table throughout your meal. Over here, these are some of the designs from Carême himself. You can see you can have an Athenian ruin, all made out of sugar, or a Grecian temple, all made out of sugar as well. You didn't always eat them. It's a bit of a sort of mind game, is à la Française dining, because not everything on the table was designed to be eaten, even if technically it was edible. This is another reason you really needed to know what you were doing with this style. It was very, very difficult to learn. If you went to dinner and you found, for example, a beautiful sugarcraft temple on the table, you might be tempted to have a nibble. Do you know your hostess well enough? Are you the right kind of person to be there? Are you absolutely certain that your hostess hasn't rented the sugarcraft for the evening? Because it was perfectly possible to do that. And can you imagine trying to return your sugarcraft temple and having to apologise because someone has taken a bite out of one of the little fences around the bottom? Not great. I'm not sure your returnable deposit would really come back. Let's have a closer look, though, at the kind of dishes that were on the table as well. This is a typical one-course layout. Remember, I said that a family dinner wouldn't involve a vast amount of food. It would just be something fairly muted. In the middle, there's a roast turkey. You've got a cod's head and shoulders. There's meat at the bottom and vegetables around. That's the kind of thing that you just sit down to with 6 or 7 of you. But that's not really a dinner, is it? I mean, that's more like a sort of light supper. Let's go for something a little bit more impressive. This, for example, you can see here you've got 2 courses and then there's going to be dessert on top of this as well. So if I just populate that so that you can see how it works on the table with another table plan, you can see the outline of dishes behind there. What have you got on there? Well, you've got mock turtle. That's actually calf's head soup. You've got another soup at the bottom. Then you've got tongue, and you've got loads of various things on there, but all of them very much savoury. You eat your soups, you then go on to your meats, your made dishes. Everything's taken away, and in comes your second course, and you can see there roasted leveret and roasted ducklings, apricot tart, sweet dishes are very much mingling with savoury dishes. Not necessarily eaten at the same time, but there's nothing to stop you having a go. If it was Christmas, you'd have beef and plum pudding on the table at the same time. Remember what the poor were eating back at that coronation feast, and they would be eaten together. So if you do want a taste of early Victorian Britain, try having a slice of Christmas pudding with a slice of beef, and you will be there in an instant. If you don't believe me, just try it in a sandwich as a kind of starter for 10, as it were. Don't forget as well, there's always dessert. So in the case of a table layout like this, once you've eaten your fill, everything then comes away and in comes something like this. So cherries and greengages, strawberries and figs, those kind of things on the table, and then that goes away. A dinner like this would take about 2.5 to 3 hours. And at the end of it, the ladies would leave the room to go and drink tea, and the gentlemen would stay behind to drink punch and coffee. Realistically, one of the reasons for that gap is that everybody is dying for a wee by that point. So the women go off and call for their chamber pots, and the gentlemen stay behind and dig their chamber pots out of the sideboard or skirting boards or whatever it's going to be. That way everyone can relieve themselves, and then they can regather after dinner to play music and generally be extremely drunk, or at least that's the impression you get based on depictions of the time. What about the food? Well, the food had to look good from all angles, because this is a style where the food is on the table and everybody is looking at it. But there are angles and there are angles. If you sit yourself down at the table and you realise that every single animal's bum is pointing at you, you might get the impression your hostess doesn't love you very much. And that would be correct. Although animals were also placed for the good of the carver so that he, and it usually was a he at this point, could carve on the table easily. Animals were always served heads and legs on. Remember, there are no written menus, so if you're going to identify your roast meats, you have to do it by what they look like. What are the legs like? Where's the head? Is it on the wing? Is it under the wing? Is it tucked through the wing? Hence the slight gory nature of the hair itself. Up there in the middle, you can see the cod's head and shoulders, another dish that we would probably not eat today, or at least not voluntarily eat. Actually, it's quite a good dish because it's cut back, so you have quite a lot of cod steak really here. You've got the cheeks, you've got a kind of fishy goo around the face, you've got the tongue. There's a lot there, a lot of different textures and tastes for absolutely everyone. Mutton cutlets, as you can see, a grand salad. This is a lamb's head curry in the middle, which you can see with the balls around it. We made it here at Audley End one Easter, and it took 3 days. You take the ears, you boil them for several hours, you slit them, you then breadcrumb, you deep fry them, you make croquettes out of the brains, you take the meat off the face, you make that into a curry. I mean, it's a lamb's head. It does seem like a lot of work, but at the end of it, it looks absolutely spectacular. And served like that in the round, it has an appeal to absolutely everybody sitting around the table. This up here is larded lamb's topside, so the strip that goes along lamb saddle, if you like, that goes along the backbone. Larding was extremely popular at this point, and it literally is sewing strips of bacon through the flesh like that, so it looks kind of a bit like a porcupine. Look down there, you've got gotha cake, which is a brown bread and cherry cake done in a mould. You've got cardoons sitting here in the middle, something we very, very rarely eat today, but which is delicious. Apple pie, queen cakes. This is a blancmange done in a mould with an asparagus on the top. You dye the jelly green with spinach juice because food colouring doesn't yet exist, although it will by the end of the Victorian era, and beautiful jellies and blancmange eggs. It's all designed to really appeal to all of the senses. Your visuals in particular. When you see this on the table, you will think to yourself, wow, this is a dinner to be invited to. And that is the point of all this food. It isn't a gargantuan display for nothing either. Those of you who are thinking there must be an awful lot of waste, well, no, because all of this gets recycled, or as we would say today, upcycled an awful lot of the time. If you've got cardoons left, for example, well, fine. Cooked cardoons, like any other form of vegetable, can go into a vegetable curry the next day. If you've got hair left, well, strip the meat off the bones and then turn it into something like a hash, which is just cold meat that's been reheated in its own gravy. If you've got a bit of apple pie left, you probably can't reserve that to the family, but you can serve it to the servants. And anything that's left at the end of the day will go out and feed the poor at the gate, because that is one of the fundamental duties of the mistress of a house like this. Built into this system is the idea of huge largesse, but absolutely no waste at all. But let's move on. 1851, the Great Exhibition. This is Britain at its urban technical best. 1851 is the census year in which Britain is first declared to be the very first urbanised nation in the world. The first year where more people live in towns than do in the countryside. Britain is no longer an agrarian nation, but one whose primary businesses are industrial, those that are based in factories and in urban centres. The Great Exhibition of that year, I'm sure you've all heard of it, was an enormous success, masterminded largely by Queen Victoria's husband, the Prince Consort, Prince Albert, and filled with the glories of every country across the world. It was designed to showcase how amazing the Victorian globe was, how many incredible things you could buy, and to showcase really what was coming forward in terms of new technology. That technology did affect the kitchen, and this point onwards really is a point where we start to see a lot of the cook's cheats and shortcuts that we are familiar with today as well. It's an era where we start to see things like baking powder for example. Where food colouring is about to come on the horizon, it takes until really the 1870s for food colouring, petrochemical-based food colouring to start to come into kitchens. We start to see things like prepared mustards get much more traction, prepared cocoa, all of the brands and the branding that we are familiar with today, when we walk around a supermarket and think, I'm not having that, I've never heard of it. Well, this is all something we owe to this period, in particular in Victorian Britain. This is an era where big commerce, this big industry is starting to chase consumers. And it's an era where the middle classes, in particular the urban middle classes, really want to get on board with these new products because it means they can start to cook in a way which perhaps wasn't open to them before. If you're a cook in 18th century Britain and you want to make a sponge cake, you're going to beat your egg yolks and beat your egg whites, you're going to mix everything up, you're going to sieve your flour, you're going to incorporate your egg yolks, incorporate your whites very, very carefully, and then you're going to put that cake in an oven, which you're going to test with your hand, probably putting it in to check it's the right temperature and put it in. It's going to take a certain level of skill and time and experience. If you're a cook in the 1860s and you decide to make a sponge cake, you may well have one of the new gas ovens that are coming on the market. And you may well make use of baking powder, which will raise your cake without any need for all that whisking. A cook like Mrs. Crocombe at Audley End would say that using baking powder was a cheat. The cake wasn't as good and it tasted soapy. And she'd probably be right, certainly on the soapy thing. But a cook working in an urban environment where she's the only person in a kitchen is going to equally rightly say, well, yes, but I don't have the time for that. And with these new ingredients and new technology, I can do pretty much what you're doing, but in a tenth of the time. So you really do see cookery start to change. Things like branded sauces as well coming on the market and turning out to be very, very popular indeed. Mid-Victorian dining, on the face of it, not that different to early Victorian dining. There's still an awful lot of food on the table. You can see again a picture from the Royal Archive over here. This one is the christening of Prince Leopold in 1857. And if you look, once you've got beyond the level of chandelier and gold on the table, you can still see that there are dishes on the table. What I love about this as well is the fact that there's so much greenery on the table that you can pretty much control your diners. If you don't think that two people should be talking to each other, you just stick a tree between them and there's no way they can do it. It's great from that point of view. Over there on the right, you have a picture which is actually a billiard table converted into a dining room table. Yeah, another really good example of Victorian ingenuity with a footman, quite probably the grocer's boy rented in for the day. I suspect that family are not quite of the ilk to be affording a footman, but you can see that there's lots and lots of things on the table still. The table layouts were now in transition. Well, what's on the table? Still, as I mentioned, lots and lots of food. This is the dining room here at Audley End House, and you can see that you've got a lot more greenery than you had before, that level of control, but also that there is still food. This is a table set for the second course, so you can see that some of those are sweeter. Over there is a picture from an 1880s edition of Beeton's Book of Household Management. Now, I'm very chary about Mrs. Beeton. It's a great source, and a lot of people do mention Mrs. Beeton when they talk about Victorian dining. But Isabella Beeton was a journalist who plagiarised the vast majority of her recipes from other people, mainly Eliza Acton. Isabella Beeton wrote really well. Her tone of voice, her style, the way in which she calls women to action, all of those, absolutely brilliant. But her recipes were not original, and she is certainly not a good guide to dining in the style that you would expect here at Audley End. By the 1880s, in any case, Isabella Beeton was dead. She died at the age of 28, so the later editions of the book were not written by her. The 80s edition has really good pictures, though, and this is what she called in the 80s, or what she didn't call, but the committee writing the book called old-fashioned dining. So this is the kind of thing that you would expect to see in the 1850s and 1860s. A lot more flowers. Still lots of food, but the food is now starting to play second fiddle to the flowers. There's more cutlery. The napkins are on the table and slightly more interestingly folded. There are little candles under paper lampshades because nothing says dinner like a frisson of excitement that you might get burnt to death that night. This is a table which has moved on, and you see that in the menus as well. Over here, you have a menu from Charles Francatelli's Modern Cook, and next to it, a menu from Isabella Beeton. You can see they are quite similar because, in fact, Beeton has pretty much copied Francatelli's menu directly into her own book. But they are a very good indication of this transitional style. Charles Francatelli was, as some of you will know, cook to Queen Victoria, briefly. He worked for the royal palaces for about 18 months, but only spent about 9 of those in royal service before he went on gardening leave after a fracas in the kitchen. Some reports suggest that he hit the clerk of the kitchen and then had to climb out of a window and run away before the police arrived. That may or may not be true. The tabloids existed then as they do now. But what is certain is that he joined the kitchens for a brief while, cooked for a brief while, and then left with a sigh of relief, probably with something of a cloud over his head, to go back to his job at the Reform Club. I'm not surprised he left myself, because when he was at the Reform Club, he was on a salary of £1,000 a year, which is a phenomenal amount, especially versus the 300 he was on in the Royal Kitchens. Add in the fact that the Royal Kitchens were, well, frankly, over pretty much an open sewer, and therefore there was poo up the walls most of the time, and the whole thing reeked of glue and wee. And if I was Francatelli, I'd have left too. But he did spend the rest of his career claiming in large letters to have been the late cook to His Majesty, he really did kind of go to town on it. So The Modern Cook was very much sold as a book which would let you into the secrets of the royal household, even though, well, it didn't say anything about the level of sewage, so to be honest, it didn't really let you into any secrets at all. But the book is nevertheless a really fun read. You can see the way that his menu is laid out, and it is no longer laid out as if you can see from above what's on the table. So if you remember that previous menu, you could map it onto the table. You can't with this one. It reads much more like a modern menu. There are soups, again, in this case a spring soup and a bisque of crabfish. There are fishes, again, exactly as you would have in a full à la Française, so crimped salmon and then perch. There are your made dishes. He also has removes which replace some of the dishes, so when your fish is eaten, they would normally be taken away and something else would replace them just briefly. That's the remove course. You've got lamb cutlets, you've got fillets of fowl with asparagus peas, you've got lobster, you've got spring chickens. That is all still your first course. You could serve all of that on the table at once. Take it away and bring in your second course, your guinea fowls, your ducklings, your Compiègne cake, your broccoli, your spinach, etc., etc. But with this style, you could also serve it as 4 courses. And that's what you can see over on the right. The same layout, but instead of being served as 2 courses, it's been elongated to 4. So now you have your soup and fish as 1 course. You have your made dishes as another course. You then have your roast meats as another course, and your vegetables and sweet dishes as another course. And you've still got dessert and ices on top of that, by the way. So just in case you think, 4 courses is enough, no, this is now sort of 5. So what's happened is that you're having the same amount of food, but it's much more spread out. You're starting to see a move to what we would call sequential service today. And again, the food reflects that. The food is still designed to be seen, but it's got slightly more portion size built in, slightly more control. It's slightly more designed to sort of not compete with the flowers. The food is no longer the focus point on the table. Now it's a mixture. You've got flowers, you've got your flammable lanterns, and you've got the food. So it's not quite as spectacular. It's a bit more round. It's a bit more muted, really, rather generally. So you might have something like a turbot that you can see up there. That's got its napkin round it to be then shown to diners and then portioned up. You might have larded sweetbreads. Again, that's something that you would quite easily have had in the earlier era as well. So you just take a sweetbread, you lard it, and you stand it on some crusts of bread with a sauce round it. You might have something like a huge joint of beef still. All of these things completely characteristic of the earlier era still. But you can see that there is a creep towards a slightly different style. Something like this, for example, which are chickens that are piled up. Those sort of little fans that you can see, they're coxcombs. Trust me, you do not want to be preparing coxcombs. They are really fiddly. This, however, is very indicative of this period of cooking. It is still a dish designed to be shared, but it looks really silly. This is what happens when technology creeps in. So when your cook can now easily produce a sponge cake in her middle class house, your upper class cook is asked to do something different. If she can do that, we need to do something better. And what we're going to do that's better is we're going to boil coxcombs for a long time and then peel them and then deep fry them. This is a period where food starts to look ever more piled, ever more silly, I suppose, and ever more elaborate, because time is money. So if you own a house like this, you don't want to turn out something that the middle classes are doing. Your cooks are going to be pushed to spend more time and more effort making dishes look great. And since they're all still designed to be shared, what you end up with is basically enormous piles of meat with stuff sticking out of them. So if you see a picture of an enormous pile of meat, usually whole meat, whole chickens, whole guinea fowls, whole woodcocks, whole larks, with skewers sticking out of them with stuff on them, by and large, it's this period. Roast meat still served heads and legs on, and in the middle there you can see one of my favourite Victorian dishes just because it's so challenging, which is Jerusalem artichokes and sprouts in the same dish. Just going to let you think about the fact that these corsets at this point are quite tight. Yeah, it's quite painful. I've tried it. However, it is a real dish and it is delicious. Many of these pictures, by the way, especially the more gorgeous ones, are those that we took as part of the shoot for the Victorian Way cookery book. Those of you familiar with the Mrs. Crocombe videos on YouTube and who are probably enormous fans of the series already may already possess the book. But those of you that don't, if you do want more of an insight into Victorian cookery, including recipes that have been transcribed for the modern kitchen and gorgeous photographs, then that's the place to head. Things like, for example, the Gertrude that you can see there. I think it's supposed to be Guirlande and got garbled in the translation by Eliza Acton. It's a beautiful, layered, creamy sponge cake covered, as you can see, with icing and made to look like a garland of fruit. The recipes from this period are absolutely fantastic, and it's quite easy to replicate many of them because they use things like food colouring and raising agents. So this is really an era that if you want to start trying Victorian cookery, this I would suggest should be your go-to. Just maybe don't try this one, the tambala vegetables, because that one is one of those more fiddly ones. So for that one, what you want to do is take a charlotte mould, it's a plain round mould, cut up lots and lots of vegetables, say carrot and turnip, very, very thinly and into entirely regular shapes. Stick a bit of lemon jelly or aspic around the outside of it. Layer in all of your vegetables to form a mosaic. Stick a chicken mousse in the middle of that and then some chicken breasts in the middle of the mousse. Stick a cartouche on the top, steam it for 20 minutes and turn it out perfectly without any of the vegetables falling off. Yeah, maybe don't. So, moving on, the High Victorian age. This is the age where really we would recognise what's going on the streets. This is an era where we are very urbanised and where town centres are starting to really come to life. Up to this point, town centres have been a bit of a no man's land. You could go into them if you were wealthy. There would be certain sort of shopping streets where you'd go and buy your ribbons, and you'd certainly pop along to the grocer's in your carriage and hand your list out through the window, unless you were really wealthy, in which point your maid would do it for you. But in the late Victorian era, and I'm talking sort of 1880s, 1890s, town centres started to be populated by wealthy people once more. A lot of that was to do with the fact that department stores opened. You can see in the background there Peter Robinson, and also tea rooms such as the ABC and Lyons chains. This was really an era where commerce came to the fore. If you could sell it, then that was great. Somebody somewhere would buy it. And you can see that reflected in cartoons like this from Punch, which is an urban landscape. You can see that the level of advertising was phenomenal. There were some great things happening at this point in terms of advertising. Thomas Lipton in particular was bringing American techniques over, so things like running pigs through the centres of towns with made for Liptons branded on their cheeks, so people knew that they could go and buy hams from Lipton's because they'd seen them running around. He also paraded elephants through towns with giant cheeses on their backs. So, I mean, you know, there's a lot to love about this period, quite frankly. However, when it comes to dinner, I am not a large fan of the 1890s. You may have picked up a certain level of bias towards the glories of the à la Française dinner. I really like that communal style where you are sharing with other people but building up your own plate. This is where it all starts to go a bit wrong. I mean, you've seen the rot starting to set in, that elongated meal where you've got a lot less choice in each course. Well, this is where the full-scale revolution happens and we stop putting food on the table. This is a picture from The Graphic in 1890, and you can see that there is a woman looking for her place setting. And just look at that table. I mean, there's no food there, there's just greenery. This is brilliant in terms of controlling your guests. It's not just a plant between Aunt Gertie and Uncle Fred now. It's an entire massive great gold thing stuffed with a fern. You could even now get tables which had holes cut in them with a little plank underneath them so that you could plant a full plant in a flower pot, put it in the hole, and you would literally have a plant growing out of your table. I mean, okay, that is actually quite cool. So here you are, full à la Française. You can see that the etiquette of dinner is in full flow. The men and ladies are parading into the room. They've always done this. The idea is that the gentleman of highest status takes the lady of highest status in, and then the gentleman of the next highest status takes the lady of the next, and you get the message, so on and so forth. It all means that you need to know who everybody is, so it's a really good way of keeping it in the family. This style, though, has a really big advantage over à la Française. There's no way with this style you're going to take a dish of Ruffs and Reeves and eat it all by mistake and then end your career in a terrible cataclysmic dinner disaster, because this style has rules. This style has books. This style has written etiquette. Now, it was said by more than one person at the time that a book of etiquette in the possession of a diner was virtually a pièce de conviction, apparently. So in other words, if you need the book, you're not the right type of person to be doing it. But nevertheless, there was a huge market by now for etiquette manuals, where you could buy the book and read what you were supposed to be doing. And I have to say, they are worth reading, because you do learn an awful lot. For example, in case you were wondering how to tackle an orange. First, let me advise you to avoid embarking upon an orange unless you are an adept. It requires long experience, a colossal courage, any amount of cool self-possession, and a great skill to attack and dispose of one without harm to yourself or your neighbour. No amount of care can prevent the juice from besprinkling your own shirt or your neighbour's gown, be she opposite or beside you. In fact, no gown, no spotless shirt front within range is safe, while there seems to be in the human eye some uncanny magnetism whereby it attracts itself to the juice of this pungent fruit. Tangerines are more manageable, but if after this you feel drawn to an orange or urged by a spirit of defiance to try your fortune, here is the safest and most correct mode of attack. The issue lies between you and the fruit. Cut the orange in two, then in 4 pieces, afterwards cutting the pulp from the skin and conveying it on the fork to the mouth. It sounds simple. That is from G.R.M. Devereux's Etiquette for Men, which is a fabulous book full of things like that, and then it all gets dumbed down in the Edwardian period and it's not as fun anymore. But, I mean, with advice like that, if you are a bachelor about town, are you going to go to dinner? Are you going to take that risk? Surely afternoon tea is a bit of a safer way to kind of dip your toe in the waters. This is why it really was trial by dinner. Get it wrong and you'll be ostracised. So what's on the table? Oh, no food. I mean, this one actually I think looks like a group of sailing ships kind of all carrying on around the central floral decoration, but it pretty much was like this. Napkins. Massive obsession for the late Victorians. Gotta be said, bit weird, but napkins were where it was at. Could you fold your napkin into a bishop's mitre? I hope so. If not, well, get a new housekeeper. Tulips, all sorts of little things. The plates, all round by now. You don't need funkily shaped plates because there aren't any on the table. All you need is your dinner plate, because in this service style, you're going to be served by a footman who is going to come to the side with everything on a huge platter and offer it to you, and you will take from that platter. It is not quite, as it will become, here is a plate of your food. It is very much a waiter with stuff. Those of you that have seen Downton Abbey would have seen the service style in that, and that is pretty much what I'm talking about here. So it's a big plate and you help yourself. You can see as well that there are lots and lots of pieces of cutlery on the table. The late Victorians were very keen on specialist cutlery, but there were pitfalls. You were supposed to eat your asparagus with your fingers, not with a fork. There were certain bits where you could really fall down. Are you eating that banana with a fruit knife and fork or not? Well, let me judge you. This is all about different groups of people judging each other and sitting in judgment of other groups. Get it wrong, you're not my kind of person. Get it right, fine, you can marry my daughter. Daughter clearly having no say in the matter. And the menus. Well, this looks like the kind of menu that we would be familiar with today. And indeed, at this point, you start to get written menus on the table for the first time so that you can see what's coming up and you can choose what you're going to have. Usually, you would have a choice of 2 dishes within each course. It's not great, let's face it, versus all of the food on the table before. So, for example, you would be able to choose in this menu from the 1880s from Agnes Martel. Well, first of all, you've got your hors d'oeuvre, your saucisse coming in, and then you'll be able to choose between 2 soups, 2 fish, in this case whitebait and salmon, 2 entrees, and then you've got this remove course, as it's called, which is usually one thing where you get no choice. And that's the equivalent, really, of a full roast dinner today. I think it's really boring. I mean, you look at all of this and your heart sinks slightly. Dinners were slightly shorter because of it, slimmed down a little bit. But I mean, oh, the overwhelming tedium of it. The Queen Victoria, could put away a dinner like this of 9 courses plus little bits in between in half an hour. That really was, speedy. But she could also take 2.5 hours for the same dinner, slowing down or speeding up as she desired, because it was a way of controlling all the people around the table. It was a style that was apparently favoured by cooks because it was much easier to prepare just 2 dishes, but for 18 people, than it was to prepare 18 dishes for 18 people in the old style. And you can see why it would be easier. But more than that, this was a style favoured by the upper middle classes and the wealthy who were new to their money, because you could learn this style, because it was a style that needed a lot of servants, preferably 1 for every 2 people. If you were wealthy enough, you could put on a really good display with this style, but you didn't need to know the intricacies of à la Française dining. And you didn't need to have the service. You didn't need all those plates. You could just go out and buy an off-the-peg service or commission one and job done. It really did favour people with a lot of money, but not a long family history. And you saw this because some people did resist this style. Even the Queen resisted it, or possibly especially the Queen. Although she did switch over to this linear way of dining in around 1874, she always kept a sideboard, just to remind people that huge, sort of unrelentingly meaty side dishes were part and parcel of what she wanted. Her son, Bertie, got rid of the sideboard. He switched completely. You often found that the old-style aristocracy insisted still on serving their joints, heads and legs on the table for the master of the house to carve. Again, a form of resisting this boring, ongoing, linear style. But it was easy to understand. It was easy to portion. It was easy to eat. It looked good. And it was fantastic if you were urban, if you were upper class, with all the money in the world. But frankly, where's the joy? The food has to be portioned up, doesn't it? Because if you're going to serve someone from the side, you need them to be able to take their portion from it. So the food now is designed to be served on a large platter, but have portions built within it. You have an awful lot of moulds come in. This is really the era, if you're wealthy enough, for the teeny tiny copper mould, usually an entirely pointless teeny tiny copper mould. So, for example, if you were to look at these in the middle here, well, you've got, I think they are chicken cutlets, but they're not just chicken cutlets. What's happened there is the chicken meat has been taken off the bone, it's been pureed, it's been added to aspic, it's been added to a velouté chicken sauce, then it's been shaped into a cutlet using a cutlet mould, steamed, then taken out, then floured and egged and breadcrumbed and deep fried, and then it's had some form of decorative bone put in the end of it so it looks like a chicken cutlet. But it's not a chicken cutlet. It's just a chicken pureed meatball that's been put into a fancy mould, and then it's been served on a bed of moulded potato with something green in the middle of it and a sauce. It is this level of elaboration that really hits its peak at this point. If you can afford it, Everything needs to be moulded. This is also about the Victorian control of nature. These are the Victorians, for goodness sake. You can't possibly have something natural on the table. A hare with its head on and its legs on. No, what we're going to do is we're going to take that hare meat and we're going to strip it off the bone and we're going to mix it with some aspic and we're going to mix it with some sauce and we're going to put it in a hare mould and, well, you get the idea. You get all sorts of moulds in use at this point. Over on the far corner over there, you can see a picture from Mrs. de Salis's dishes à la mode or à la mode cookery, which is an absolutely fantastic example of this particular style of cookery, which was known as recherche, because it was different, it was sought after. I can't even remember what that dish is. I think it's lobster. Would you guess that that was lobster? I mean, it has mini Union Jacks all around it, which are moulded lobster, which have been mixed with aspic and lobster sauce and then pureed and put through. You get the idea. Everything has been moulded. The top in the middle there is one of my favourites from Agnes Marshall. They are quails that have been deboned and then stuffed and then wrapped around each other and put in little pastry cases and then put into paper cases. So it's a little bit like having a sort of cupcake, but it's made out of a quail served in a paper case. It goes on and on and on. You can see over there, larks served in onions. It's half an onion hollowed out with a lark in it. The head's still on. Sometimes it did still happen, but with the lark, they're kind of too small to start to take the head off. And anyway, apparently the point is the crunch. So great, I'm not sure. I've never had lark, what with it being illegal. You've got fillets of sole served in a delice. That's obviously sole Veronique, which is an iconic dish of this era, invented by Auguste Escoffier, and so on and so forth. There are also still cook's cheats and shortcuts which make all of this easier. If you are looking, for example, at that rather beautiful peach jelly and thinking, gosh, doesn't that look lovely? Well, that is made from a tin of peaches. You take each peach out of the syrup, you brush the centre of the peach with a little red food colouring, and then you set it into orange jelly. They look fantastic, much better than an actual peach would look hollowed out. And you also get some bland nonsense like that banana dish in the middle, which is basically banana custard that's been set in a mould or in a teacup in that case and turned out and tastes exactly as you would imagine. It's not great, is it? Add to that the fact that by the end of the 19th century, you're starting to get the influence of restaurants as well. I haven't talked about restaurants because I'm talking exclusively about the domestic sphere, but restaurants were a growing phenomenon. The first really good restaurant in Britain was the Savoy in the 1890s, and the Savoy really did kickstart restaurant dining culture in Britain. It was the first globally recognised restaurant. In restaurants, you didn't have waiter service where you had the plate brought to you. You had your stuff plated up in the kitchen, brought out and put down. And although it takes another 50 years, really that's become the norm in Britain, that's where it starts from. And restaurants are another really good idea for the man about town who's not sure of what's going on, because you can rent a private dining room in a restaurant and hold your dinners there, and you can dictate what the menus are going to be. And so from the very end of the Victorian period right onwards, you start to see restaurants become focus points for dinners, much more than houses like this. And it's at that point that dinner giving and the etiquette of dinner starts to switch to restaurants really from the domestic sphere. It's at this point too, therefore, that we start to hear of chefs for the first time. The celebrity chefs that we have heard of realistically before Escoffier are just Carême and perhaps Alexis Soyer. That's kind of it. And I suspect many of you are going, who, what, where? By the time you get to Escoffier, who is a restaurant cook, people have started to heard of cooks. So to have everything we have today, competitive dinner giving, fully plated up food and celebrity chefs, you have to go forward from the 1890s and look at restaurants as the birth of the new type of dinner. But that, of course, is not Victorian. I'm going to leave you, therefore, with a picture of an Edwardian dinner, right at the end of the era, just beyond it. This is called After Dinner by Jules Gunn, and it's one of my favourite paintings because it's so beautiful. You can see everything I've talked about. You can see the flowers on the table. There's a little bit of dessert on there as well because that's been laid out on the table for people to have. You can see the soft candlelight. You can see how elegant this dinner is. Everyone is replete. They are beautiful people. This is exactly what you should be aspiring to if you're putting on a Victorian dinner. If you get it right, you're set for life. You've impressed everyone around you. You'll do really, really well in terms of your career, in terms of the marriage prospects of your children, and in terms of your social standing. If you get it wrong, you'll be a pariah. Nobody will want to come and dine with you, and everybody will ignore you. And if you think that's just a Victorian phenomenon, think about the last year or so. Think about what you've missed. Has it been picnics in the park with your friends, going to museum sites and theatres? I hope it has. But I suspect you've also missed the simple act of getting together with friends and putting on a dinner. I suspect that for many of us, all of the COVID crisis will not truly be over until we've sat down with our friends and presented a dinner where we know smugly that we've got it right, where we know that we've just pulled one up on our friends, where we've put on a dinner we're proud of and we've reinforced our links with the people we know through the giving and sharing of food in a slightly competitive way. One bonus point for those of you who are watching this and suddenly thinking to yourself, I want to cook all this amazing food. I'd like to just mention, as I have done a couple of times on the way through, How to Cook the Victorian Way, the cookery book that myself and Andrew Han, who is one of the in-house English heritage historians, wrote last year. This is a book that ties in with the YouTube videos featuring Cathy Hipperson playing the Victorian cook here at Audley End, Avis Crocombe. It's a collection of recipes drawn both from Avis Crocombe's own manuscript cookery book and other books in the era, all transcribed for the modern kitchen. Before I go completely, I've got time to answer some of the questions that you've sent in. So, let's have a look. Are there any other well-known cooks for any other English heritage properties? I'm thinking of the chef de Queen Victoria, Charles Francatelli. Did he come to Osborne House? This is from Debbie Millard. Well, I discussed Francatelli briefly on the way through. He never went to Osborne House because he got sacked before Osborne House was built, so no. And the names of the other royal chefs were never particularly well known. I mean, Francatelli wasn't a celebrity, he was to himself, but not really to the wider public. And in terms of English heritage properties, well, they all had cooks, but none of them were well known. Mrs. Crocombe wasn't well known, she was just another cook. I mean, she did really well to be cooking for a baron in the 1880s, but Avis Crocombe was not and is not a celebrity cook. She was just one among many cooks. I'd urge you all to watch Cathy Hipperson's talk on Avis Crocombe and the cookery book to learn more about her life and times. There are, however, other cooks associated with English heritage properties and other cookery books. There are manuscript cookbooks relating to Rest Park, to Kirby Hall and to Brodsworth Hall, to name just a few. And there's a book of menus relating to Osborne House as well, so perhaps in the future you'll hear more about those cooks, their cooking and their lives. How many courses would there have been in a Victorian banquet? Well, as you've seen, 3 at the beginning of the period and anything from 9 upwards by the end. So at the beginning, when you've got your à la Française table, it's 3 courses, including dessert. And at the end, the standard menu layout was 9, but a lot of the time that could grow. So you might have 9 courses, but you'd probably have a pause in between sort of course number 5 and 6. And at that point, you might have a sorbet or something like that. And we do know at Blenheim that they were having 28 courses. So there could be quite a lot, but there could also just be 9. How did cooks of large houses manage to plan and cook meals for both the upstairs and downstairs? Did they delegate the planning and cooking of staff meals to a deputy, or did they really do it all? And what sort of meals did the servants have? This is from Vivian Fleet. In a house like this, you'd have usually 4 servants. You'd have your cook, your kitchen maid and your second kitchen maid, and then a scullery maid. That was certainly the case here in 1881. The cook would do all of the cooking for upstairs, and the kitchen maid, usually the first kitchen maid, would cook for the servants. The second kitchen maid would aid the 2. Now, it did depend a bit on the service style. For à la Française service, it was really easy for the main cook to do all the cooking for upstairs and the kitchen maid to do all the cooking for downstairs. When you move towards à la Russe, that sequential service style, you start to have a lot more of a system with feeder dishes. So at that point, the second kitchen maid might make all the stocks, the first kitchen maid might then make those stocks into sauces, and the cook would finish them. So it depends a little bit on the service style. Kitchens like this were very, very efficient though. You obviously had more staff, the larger number of people you had to feed. So the royal kitchens had about 45 staff, cooks, master cooks, yeoman cooks, boy cook, you name it, they have all of them. And in terms of the servants, well, they're eating fairly plain food. So the top servants will usually get dibs on what comes off the top table. and then the lower servants usually won't. And what you tend to find is that the servants divide to have their meals. So at dinner time, which would be held about 1 o'clock for the servants, all of the servants would get together in the servants' hall and they have their food. They normally have about £1 of meat a day, which might be bacon or sausages, or it might be game from the estate, or it might be pork or mutton, usually boiled because that's the easiest way to do it. They'll have that, lots and lots of vegetables, probably a fairly plain cake, that kind of thing. But when they get to the point where they're having the second course, so the cake bit, the upper servants, governess, cook, any personal servants like ladies' maids or valets, they'll get up and they'll go into the housekeeper's room. And that's where they will have the dibs that come off the top table, and they'll also have perhaps a few nicer things that the cook might be trying out for the upper servants, that kind of thing. So it's quite regimented, and the servants ate well, but fairly monotonously, I think it's fair to say. I don't think we've got any other questions, but if you do have questions, then do write them into the comment section below and we will do our best to answer them. Once again, thank you very much for listening. I hope you get a chance to listen to some of the other talks put on as part of this Members Week for you. Thank you for supporting English Heritage and enjoy the rest of your week.